Hello everyone, thanks for joining us this afternoon. While we wait for a few more people to join us, I'm just going to send out a quick poll. So when that appears on your screen, if you can just respond by clicking on the answer that applies to you. Right, okay. Right, so thanks for attending this afternoon's webinar. You can see on the screen our session for today. We're going to start with an overview of the new Combined Technical Award in Creative Design and Production. This is replacing our current Creative Studies Craft qualification, and it's with the DFE pending approval for inclusion on the 2020 performance tables. So just to clarify, the qualification's not yet approved, but we are expecting feedback from the latest submission later on this month. You may know that the first time we submitted the qualification, it wasn't successful in gaining approval, but the feedback we got was very specific and detailed, and we have responded to that, and we're going to explain those changes as we go through the session today. We're then going to look at Unit 1, which is the external assessment element of the qualification, and we'll talk you through the subject content for that before moving on to Unit 2, which is the internal synoptic assessment for the qualification. Then at the end of the session, we'll explain what resources will be available to support you, and you will notice that there's a time close to the end of the presentation for questions, but I'm sure you're going to have lots about the new model, and I'd like to encourage you to ask those throughout the session, so we can make the webinar really interactive. You can do that by typing into the question bar on your screen. Now, we did a webinar yesterday and the question panel seemed to be a bit temperamental. So if you'd like to, can you just type into the question pane just a hello or say that you can hear us, just so that we can see that that's actually working? Yes, lovely. So I can see a few people have responded there. That's great. Thank you. Right, okay, so we're going to do some introductions before we start. My name's Karen Taylor. I work in the curriculum team here at NCFE. The role of the curriculum team is to support centres with the planning and delivery of the VCERT qualifications. Prior to joining NCFE, I was a DT teacher. I taught DT for 17 years and was a curriculum leader for 8 of those years and a head of faculty for 3 years. So I'm really pleased to be working with the VCERT qualifications, and I completely believe in this qualification. I think it's a great solution for our learners, those who just simply struggle to access the current GCSE DT qualifications. Joining me today is Chris Tubritt, our Qualification Development Manager. Chris has led the development of this VCERT model across all of the subject areas, so he's going to talk through the structure and design of the qualification with you today. Chris also has significant teaching and leadership experience with a wide range of vocational qualifications, so we both understand the challenges you're facing when you're delivering qualifications like these. So before we move on, I am going to send out another poll. I just want to see if anybody has experience with our current craft qualification, which is the one that this qualification is replacing. Right, okay, so we've got about 2/3 of people have. That's great, thank you. Right, I'm going to hand you over to Chris, and he's going to talk you through the qualification.
Hello everybody. So we'll start with the chart here, which shows how the qualification is assessed. You can see it's constructed of 2 units. Unit 1 is an external assessment worth 40% of the qualification. This is in line with DFE minimum percentage for external assessment, and the remaining 60% comes from the internally assessed synoptic project. The overall qualification grades available range from level 1 pass up to level 2 distinction, so both level 1 and level 2 are included within one qualification as opposed to being 2 separate qualifications. So on this slide you can see a suggested delivery guide. The VCERTs have been designed to be delivered over 1, 2 or 3 years depending on what is best for your circumstances, but this model shows a 2-year delivery, and you can see that it has been designed for Unit 1, the external assessment, to be delivered and sat by learners first, with a resit opportunity if needed in the following session or academic year. As you can see from the link on the screen at the minute, that will take you to our subject page on our website, where you'll be able to get a copy of our 1 and 2 year delivery documents or our 3-year delivery document, which will give you the guidance and support needed to plan your curriculum for the different 1, 2 or 3 year delivery models. So in our combined qualification, the new model, we have moved to assessment objectives, which are mapped against assessment objectives. So these provide a consistent framework for learners and applied synoptically, allowing learners to show their knowledge and skills across the full bracket of 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. And they are applied across the full qualification, across all of our new 10 qualifications. So this shows which unit is assessed, which AO. So if we look at the external assessment, this is assessing AOs 1, 2 and 3, and the internal synoptic project is assessing all of the AOs 1 to 5. If we move back a slide, you can see that this is, excuse me, so for Unit 1, the external assessment, that targets assessment objective AO 1, 2 and 3. And then for the synoptic project, which targets the whole content of the qualification, that targets assessment objective 1 to 5, so all of them. So assessment will last 1.5 hours and will be made up of multiple choice, short answer and extended response questions. And in our feedback received recently from the DFE in terms of the changes we need to make, one of the things they did highlight with the external assessment was where we had questions which had allocated 6 to 8 marks. They didn't think the quality or rigour was there in terms of a higher level ability learners. So where we had a 6 or an 8 question mark, what they thought that we had presently was where a learner could easily answer those questions at a very low level. So they wanted to see more justification, more analysis, more evaluation, so some higher order thinking to achieve those 6 and 8 mark question and responses. So that's all summarised some of the changes that we've made to the external assessment. So moving on to the internal then, the internal project is worth 60% of your overall qualification, and the suggested completed time for the project is 21 hours. Now that is just a suggested completion time. This can and will change depending on your curriculum restraints, but it is just a suggested delivery time. The brief for the project will be released in every December and will change annually. It is important to understand that learners must access and respond to the brief in the year that they will complete the qualification. So if you're doing a traditional 2-year delivery over years 10 and 11, learners will access the brief in December of year 11. If you're doing a 2-year delivery over years 9 and 10, learners will access the brief in December of year 10, as they will be completing the qualification in that year. The performance points achieved would be carried over to when the learners leave in year 11. Now the qualification does have compensation built into Unit 1 and Unit 2 and the overall qualification. So just by means of an example, we've just got the chart on the PowerPoint slide here. And this slide demonstrates the compensatory model of the qualification, so you can see that in the first 2 examples, the learner has achieved a level 1 pass, which is the lowest grade possible in the external assessment. But if they perform really well in the external assessment, they can still achieve a level 2 pass, even if a level 2 merit overall. The bottom 2 scenarios show that if a learner doesn't pass either of the units, they won't pass the qualification overall. So where the qualification is compensatory, the learners do need to pass both assessments at a minimum of a level 1 pass.
Right, okay, I've just had a look and we haven't had any questions that have come in yet, but if you do have any, please type them into the question bar and we'll respond to them throughout the session today. Right, so I'm going to start talking you through the unit content for Unit 1. So this is the external assessment, and this has got 3 learning outcomes or LOs. So the content for these LOs has got to be covered through teaching and learning before the learner sits the assessment. So the learning outcomes or LOs for Unit 1 are LO1, they need to understand materials, techniques and safe work and practices used in different disciplines. Unit 2 is concerned with understanding the work of practitioners and their products. And LO3 is understand employment and enterprise within the creative design and production industry. So if we move on, we'll start with LO1. This is the one with the most content, and this almost forms the basis for the other LOs in both Unit 1 and Unit 2. So in this LO, Learners need to understand the function, properties and characteristics, environmental factors, cost and aesthetics associated with the listed materials, and it's important to understand that all of these materials must be covered. So on this screen here, I've listed all the materials, and you can see that for each material area, there are 3 specific materials named. Printing's also listed here because there are 3 specific print methods that must be covered as well. It's important to remember, though, that if the material isn't listed here, it won't come up in the assessment. Learners will only ever be assessed on the materials that are listed. And this is a draft specification. So although the DFE are happy with the content of this specification, there may still be a few changes. For example, you might see a very slight change with some of the actual materials that are listed. I know I've been speaking with the product development team, and one of the changes that we've been looking at is changing terracotta to just clay in general. I think that might be a bit more accessible for people, a bit less specific. So moving on through LO1, Section 1.2 covers production methods and techniques. So in the specification, they've defined a technique as the manner and ability by which a technical craft skill is applied to produce a desired result, and a method as the process of manufacture. So Section 1.2.1 covers production methods, and the focus here is on scales of production. So the need to understand production methods, including mass production, batch production, and bespoke production. Then moving on to 1.2.2, that's covering the actual techniques used with the materials. And here, learners need to know and understand the production techniques, but only used within 3 chosen disciplines. So whereas in the first section, learners needed to know all of the materials, here they only need to know production methods associated with 3 disciplines that you choose. So the disciplines are ceramics, metal craft, printing, paper craft, textiles, woodcraft and plastic craft, and the production techniques relevant to those have got to include cutting, joining and construction techniques, forming shape techniques, surface treatment and finishing techniques, and the tools and equipment used within each technique. So what discipline you choose is going to be entirely dependent on your centre, the resources available to you, and the expertise of the staff who are going to be delivering the qualification. So it might be that you've got a brazen hearth and a member of staff who's confident teaching the casting process, so you could cover pewter casting with your learners. Another centre might not have those resources, but they might have lots of textiles and printing equipment, and a staff member who's confident with silkscreen and lino printing, so they might cover that. The choice is up to you as a centre, as long as you select a minimum of 3 different disciplines from the list provided. Then 1.3 covers safe working practices, and we're going back again to this covering all of the disciplines. So they need to understand safe working practices involved within the different disciplines, and it's those 7 different disciplines I listed earlier. So it's stated that the learner needs to know and understand risk assessment. So that includes the concept of a risk assessment and how to apply the risk assessment in context across all disciplines. They need to understand the meaning of hazards, risks, control measures and PPE. So that's LO1, which is by far the largest of the 3 LOs in Unit 1. Have we had any questions that have come in yet? I wondered if we might have had any questions about that particular LO. No, not yet. If you've got any, please type them in and we'll respond to them through the session. Okay, so I'll move on to LO2. This is for learners to understand the work of practitioners and their products, and this LO has got much less content than LO1, but the learners will need the knowledge that they've gained by covering LO1 in order to be able to access this effectively. So 2.1 covers product analysis and contextual factors. So they need to understand and be able to carry out a product analysis, and that's got to include materials, techniques, aesthetics and function. So in regards to materials and techniques, learners will be referring back to the content that they've learned by covering LO1. Then next, learners need to know and understand the contextual factors that influence the creation of craft products. So that needs to include socio-economic influences, cultural influences, and creative influences. So if we move on to 2.2, the specification states that learners must know and understand the work of others and their products through researching one historical practitioner and one contemporary practitioner from within each of the different disciplines. So that's 2 from each of the disciplines that are listed before. There's 7 of them. So that sounds like a lot, 14 in total. But to try and make it more approachable, you could cover historical practitioners by teaching the learners about design movements such as Art Nouveau, the Bauhaus or Memphis studios. So that's going to allow you to discuss the contextual factors such as the socio-economic influences, cultural influences and so on. But then your learners could apply that knowledge to the different practitioners within that movement. So you could cover many of the disciplines within Art Nouveau, for example, and then the learners are going to already know your cultural and creative influences there and be able to apply it. That might make that a little bit more accessible. So for learning objective 3, learning outcome 3, learners need to understand employment and enterprise within the creative design and production industry. So 3.1 covers the employment aspect. And in this section, the learners must know and understand 3 job roles in each discipline. That's 21 job roles in total. That does sound like a lot, but it's important to remember that we are just looking for an overview of the purpose of the job role. They don't need to go really in depth, and there's a number of great websites that can support learners with this. The National Careers Service website is a really good resource. They've got job profile section with an arts, craft and design category that learners can look through. And at this point, I'm going to hand you back over to Chris because he's going to talk you through some of the careers resources that we've been developing. So if I come off here, Chris, is that all right?
Yes. Hello, everybody again. So in line with the new legislation that's coming into play this September around the GASB benchmarks, we're well aware that this has come on quickly and we want to support you in meeting those GASB benchmarks. So one of the things that we've done and produced for all of our new combined Certs is a labour market intelligence report, which is on your screen now. So if I quickly just go down to the next page on here, it gives you a little introduction as to what the report's about. It links to the paper, which is the legislation itself. But what essentially this report is, it covers all of these different regions. And what we have is all of our Certs on the next page. So for creative design production, you can have a look at the different potential progression routes, so draftsperson, product designers, but I'll show you the LMI data by region. So for example, if I clicked on product designers, it'll show me some labour market intelligence for the North, the East, Southwest, and for all the different regions. And the data it actually tells you the number of jobs in employment last session, and that goes right up to employment numbers predicted for 2024, so you can see the growth in employment by sector. It shows you the skill shortages within that region, the qualifications by level, the percentage makeup of male and female within that job area. Something that we've had really positive feedback from the learners, potentially what the wages are expected to be within that job role, but also the percentage makeup of full-time, part-time employment within that. So it gives you some really nice high-level labour market intelligence, and you can just flip back the main menu at any point and you can just click on a different LMI and you can just navigate through and it'll show you it by region. So this is just one of the areas that we've developed to support you with the GASB 8 benchmarks. What we're also supporting this with is progression maps. So this will help you with one of the LOs in terms of looking at the different potential jobs that are available and likely for learners to progress to. So we're going to be making those progression maps, but what we're also looking to develop is lessons. So you'll have the LMI report that I've just showed you, you'll have the progression maps, and you'll also have some lessons. So through that 3-pronged approach, will be helping you to hit 5 of those 8 GATRI benchmarks.
Brilliant, thank you. So just that covers the employment aspect of LO3, but they also need to understand the enterprise aspect within creative design and production. And as you can see on the screen, that includes enterprise aspects, entrepreneurial skills, and enterprise marketing and promotional methods as well. So I'll just move on here, and I'm going to pass you back to Chris again.
So the external assessment will be in the form of a written examination which will assess the learner's knowledge and understanding of content from Unit 1. A variety of assessment styles will be used, including multiple choice, short answer and long answer questions. And you can see some examples of that taken from our sample paper online on your screen now. So the questions will enable learners to demonstrate a breadth of knowledge and understanding of the subject and ensure achievement at an appropriate level, including stretch and challenge. And as far as possible, real-world case studies and contexts which are relevant to the sector will be used, and this to engage and stimulate learners on examination conditions and to facilitate the drawing out of a wide range of knowledge and skills developed through their learning. So learners should attempt all the questions, whilst it's not mandatory, obviously it's advisable that they should attempt all questions, and all marks will be clearly identified for each question. And the grade scale there that you can see on the PowerPoint slide there shows you the UMS bandings to which the marks will be aligned to, depending on which grade they'll achieve for their external assessment.
Yeah, I don't think I mentioned earlier the marks out of 80 are for the external assessment, and that would be the learner's raw mark. And then depending on the paper, these factors are going to change every window, aren't they? There'll be a conversion over to UMS, uniform mark scale, and that's where they'll get the actual grade from.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So that's Unit 1. We have had a couple of questions in, I think. I'm just going to have a look here. So, will these be given as standard movements designers, or will teachers and students be deciding on their own? David asked that question, really good question. It's up to you. That was just an example. We've been supporting the Prepare to Teach events, and that was just, obviously being a DT teacher myself, that was just one method. I thought that might make it a bit easier for you to approach. You don't have to do that. If you want to look at different historical practitioners individually, absolutely fine. It was just a suggestion. And Danielle's asked, why is this technical award not set out in the same way as the graphics technical award? Really good question, and Chris is going to answer that one.
Thanks for that question, Danielle. So if you look at all of our subject areas, the graphics qualification and the interactive media were the 2 qualifications that were most recently developed, and we had to sort of get a balance between developing as much as we possibly could and submit it in the windows with the resource time capacity we had within the organisation. And as within those 2 being recently developed, we decided to develop the other 10 areas. So whilst that graphics qualification isn't in the new combined model, the view moving forward will be looking to move that content into the new model when the performance tables reopen for submissions.
Yeah, we've actually done webinars, I don't know if you attended, for graphics and iMedia, and the EQAs are feeding back that those qualifications are going down really well at the minute. So I think it's just a case of letting them run their course for the minute, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right, okay then, so if we move on, that's all the questions, but if you do have any more, please type them in and we can answer them today. We'll move on to Unit 2.
So the internal assessment will be in the form of a synoptic project which will be externally set by NCFE to ensure quality and rigour. A different synoptic project brief will be released each December and will comprise of a number of tasks which will assess the learner and each of the assessment objectives. So the descriptors for each assessment objective in the synoptic project are available on pages 19 to 21 of the draft specification, and that's available now on our website. So the learning outcomes for Unit 2 are: learning outcome 1, understand design and production processes to respond to a craft brief. Learning outcome 2, produce craft products in response to a brief. Learning outcome 3, understand how to review craft products. And learning outcome 4, explore multi-disciplinary and upcycling approaches to the creation of craft products. So Unit 2 covers all the assessment objectives, which is why it must be carried out towards the end of the qualification, as it takes the synoptic approach, so assesses all of the content taught to learners throughout the qualification. How these AOs are assessed is no longer broken down by task. This has changed in light of recent DFE feedback, as in the first draft there were 5 tasks in the internal synoptic project sample, which assessed each a different AO. In the most recent draft, the AOs are assessed across the tasks and take a much more holistic approach. So we've just put together a diagram to try and explain how we've moved from the last version to the new version. So just to summarise, in the last version, the AOs were assigned to each task, and it was deemed by the DFE that that wasn't really synoptic in its approach. So in response to that feedback, what the approach we now do is the learner will complete tasks 1, 2, 3 and 4 and submit all of those tasks together, and then you holistically mark assessment objective 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 across the whole of the internal synoptic project.
Right, okay then. So if we go through to the unit content for Unit 2, we'll start again with LO1. So in this section, learners need to know and understand how to interpret the requirements of a craft brief, and they need to do this by understanding the aims and opportunities, constraints, cost and budget, style or themes, materials and product. So that's what they need to be looking at when they're interpreting a craft brief. If we move on to 1.2, this requires learners to know and understand what design and production processes are used in creating craft products. So they need to understand that the design process starts with research after interpreting the brief, and then will end with your final design, and that there are a list of stages that the learners need to consider as they work through the process. So they're listed in the specification, and they're listed as research, initial ideas, idea development, materials, techniques and processes, financial considerations, health and safety considerations, and final design. So they're listed. They do have further examples of what should be included within each heading, but I don't think there's any requirement for this to be a linear process, because we all know, working through these projects, that's not often the order that it does actually happen. So taking a more holistic approach will be fine, as long as your starting point and end point are the same. So the next point is concerned with the production process. So this is where the learner needs to plan the stages that they're going to go through to create a craft product. So it includes a production plan, and that's going to have to consider their final design drawing, stages of production, materials, techniques, tools and equipment, and risk assessment again. So that does feature quite heavily within the specification. LO2 is where they're going to be producing craft products in response to a brief. So this is the brief that we're going to send out every December. And in this section, learners will be required to complete the design and production processes to create 2 craft products from a minimum of 2 disciplines. And the disciplines, again, are those which we've mentioned previously. So you've got your ceramics, metal craft, printing, paper craft, textiles, wood craft, and plastic craft. And these are all going to be assessed during the internal synoptic brief. So the areas that learners need to cover are the design and production processes, safe work and practices, technical skills and production techniques, and lastly, tools and equipment. So in this section, LO3, the learners need to know and understand how to review craft products. Now, if you've had a look at the spec, you might see that there's been a slight anomaly there. We've had review craft work and then reviewing craft work. That will be amended. It is just a little typo before that went in, but basically learners do need to understand the purpose of review. So they need to know and understand how to identify the success of the product in relation to the craft brief, and identify any opportunities for improvement. Then they need to know and understand how to review their craft work. So in the internal synoptic project, when the learners completed both products, they need to then complete a final review. So that needs to include how they followed the design and production process, the use of materials, techniques and processes, the application of personal skills, function, so how well the craft products met the intended function and use, aesthetics and form, success of the product, and any identified opportunities for improvement. So the last learning outcome in Unit 2 is explore multidisciplinary and upcycling approaches to the creation of craft products. So the learner needs to know and understand how to produce a minimum of one craft product using a multidisciplinary approach. So that can be across the whole 7 lists, but it needs to cover a minimum of 2 disciplines. And they only need to create one craft item as well using upcycled materials. So 4.1, they need to know and understand how 2 or more disciplines from the list can work together through experimentation to create a craft product. Then for 4.2 in upcycling, the learners need to know and understand how to create a craft product through the use of upcycled products, just for a minimum of 1, so it only needs to be concerned with 1 discipline. And they need to use the process of upcycling to understand the creative reuse of old or unwanted products into a new craft item. So that covers the content for Unit 2, but you need to remember that there's far more detail in the specification than what we've talked through this afternoon. So it is really important to refer to the specification to make sure that you have covered all of the content required. Chris is now going to talk through the internal synoptic brief, but I have noticed that we've got a couple of questions, so we'll quickly respond to those. So can the 2 products be parts of a different product? So a children's reading chair made from woods with blanket made from textiles, for example. One product made up of smaller products which go together, or do they need to be completely separately designed and made? So is that, that's not for the multidiscipline approach. That's a question from David there. Can you just confirm, David, that you're just talking about the general products that they produce? Because the products that they do produce have to be concerned with the disciplines. But saying that, if you are, yes, the general products, if you were to produce a reading chair, to be honest, you need to remember as well that you've got 21 hours to do this, so that does seem quite an ambitious project to do. But if you were working within woodcraft and you made a children's reading chair, then the blanket to go with it, there could be separate items. So yes, I think that would work quite well. Yeah, I think that would work quite well, because you could have the chair on its own or the blanket on its own. If you were looking at an upholstered chair, then I think perhaps they're bordering into the multidisciplinary approach. So how many craft items produced in total? 2. So it's 2 within the synoptic project that learners have to make, 2 in total. James asked, can the upcycled product be a repeat of the area covered previously? Example, print and textiles. Yes, that would be fine, because you're taking an upcycling approach rather than starting from scratch. That would be no problem at all. Yeah. Right, so Chris is going to talk through the internal synoptic project, the sample brief, but please keep your questions coming in, and we'll see what we can respond to today.
So the internal synoptic project consists of a project brief, and as we mentioned earlier, this will change from year on year when it's released each December, and the project assesses knowledge and understanding from across both units 1 and 2. The suggested completion time, as we previously mentioned, is 21 hours, and again this is suggested and will change depending on your curriculum planning and restraints. Learners are required to keep a learner log to record their approach to each task. If you have a look on our qualification pages now, we do have a learner log template available for you to use for this. As learners work through the internal synoptic project, they will generate evidence in response to the task. There is a list of suggested types of evidence that could be included on page 7 of the draft sample internal synoptic project, which is available on the website now. So when it comes to assessing Unit 2, you will need to wait till the learner has completed all the tasks before you carry out your assessment. You will mark each of the assessment objectives individually, but the learner might provide evidence for one AO in a few or the different tasks, so it's important to look at the final projects holistically. The grading bands have also changed in response to DFE feedback. So in the first draft, there was a descriptor for each of the possible grade outcomes. So one for level 1 pass, level 1 merit, right up to level 2 distinction. So seven different descriptors, which thought to be too many and too difficult to distinguish between them. So we now only have 3 descriptors or 3 bands, which make grading much more straightforward. This slide shows the grading descriptors for assessment objective 4, and it's clear here that unless the learner has actually completed their outcome, they can't access band 3. So just showing you the diagram that's on the slide, if you look at the top there, just to reinforce, the learner completes all the tasks, submit the internal Synoptic project as a whole, and then you attempt to start grading assessment objectives 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 holistically across the whole project. And just focusing on assessment objective 4, if you look at band 3 in the description, the second sentence, it goes on to say that learners should demonstrate and apply technical skills to develop a complete and effective solution outcome. So this is the point I'm making. Unless they don't finish it, then they're not going to be able to access that higher grade of band 3.
Right, the next thing I was going to show you was the grading calculator, but we have had a few more questions in, so I think it'd be a good time to respond to those. So, in upcycling, oh hang on, so is this 2 products in 21 hours? That's from Harriet. Right, I'm going to go back to the draft synoptic project brief here. So it says that you've been invited, in paragraph 2, you have been invited to showcase your creative design and production skills at the event. You've been invited to display 2 craft products to be sold, showcasing your ability to work with different materials. Your 2 products must respond to the theme of the event. So yes, that's 2 products in 21 hours. And Louise has asked, why are 2 products required? Was this a DFE requirement? AQA only require 1, but multi-disciplined within that 1 item. So for example, a wall hanging with wooden frame and fabric cover. I think the idea there is that it's kind of moving away from the old style DT where learners spend ages producing 1 big outcome. This is more just, it's an assessment tool. That's what we're doing here. We're assessing skills. So producing 2 smaller items is maybe something that would be more realistic in a vocational context.
Yeah, we've got quite a good relationship with the DFE, and you know, in the previous qualification, we've had meetings to discuss the discipline element in terms of when we've been redeveloping the content. And one of the big things that they were clear to point out was that our previous craft qualifications resulted in a narrow discipline. So if they were going to prove anything moving forward, they wanted us to demonstrate that it wasn't a narrow discipline. It did cover a wide range of disciplines. So that's one of the reasons why we've had to go with the 2 disciplines approach.
Great. So Danielle's asked, in upcycling, is that separate from the 2 products being made for the 2 disciplines? Yes, it is. And if you have a look on this synoptic project brief again, it says in paragraph 3, this year's theme is seaside and cityscapes. You can choose to use 1 material for each craft product or have a multidisciplinary approach using more than 1 material. So that's referring back to the previous question from Louise. So you can use recyclable materials or upcycle materials. So in this instance, in the project brief, the learners are given the choice whether they want to upcycle. That might not be the case in future. It might be that they are required to do something that involves upcycling. In this sample one, though, it's only a suggestion, so it's left up to learners. So I hope that answers your question there. Right, I'm going to show you the grading calculator now that I talked about, but please keep your questions coming in and we'll keep answering them as we go through. So on the website, you are, after this webinar, you will receive, once I've got the recording uploaded to YouTube, you'll receive a link to be able to view this again, and you'll also receive the presentation that we've used. And on here, there's a hyperlink down at the bottom here that'll take you to the web page where our creative design and production grading calculator is. And this is a really good tool. So you can use this, you can download it, and save it to your work area so you can edit it as you wish. And we've been reassured that it won't break, will it?
No.
It won't break. And it allows you to enter your learner outcomes and calculate their overall grade. So this will work once you've had the results from your first external assessment attempt. Or if you've maybe done a mock, you could start using it from them once you've got a grade that you can use to put in the exam grade section. So it's a really good tool for planning and reporting because it gives a real-time indicator as to where learners are currently, and it could also be a really good motivational tool because you can show learners what they could achieve if they do make improvements to their work. So I've used me as an example on here. So I got a level 1 merit in my external assessment. For AO1, I was put in band 2, sorry. For AO2, I hadn't provided anything worth any note, so I was not yet achieved, so that got me a 0. AO3, I got 2. I was put in band 2. AO4, which is the example that Chris showed you before for the grading bands, where it's really important to note that unless those outcomes are finished, they can't access band 3. I only got a 2 because I haven't finished my product yet. AO5, I was only in band 1 because I hadn't really shown that I'd evaluated and planned the project very well. So the minimum overall grade I could get there is a level 1 merit, and the maximum is a level 1 distinction. And the reason they're different is because it will depend on what UMS score I actually got for the exam. So if I was only just in to the level 1 merit grade band, then I might just finish with a level 1 merit overall. But if I was quite high, almost up to level 1 distinction, then that might take me up to a level 1 distinction. So if I move on to the next slide here, you can see that on this submission, I've finished my products and I've finished them off really well. So I've now moved up to band 3 for AO4, and I've added more substance to my evaluation and planning section. So now I've gone up to a guaranteed level 2 pass. So that's a really good tool because, you know, that's obviously the bit that we struggle with, getting learners to finish off and produce a really good evaluative statements at the end. And this will just show, look, if you do this, this is what you're going to come out with. Right, so moving on. We're on to now learning resources and support and what's going to be available to you. I haven't had any more questions come in, but if you've got any more, type them in and we'll respond to them. So I want to pass you back over to Chris.
Yes, so just covering what resources are going to be available. What we've got immediately available now is the sample external assessment paper and mark scheme, the sample internal synoptic project brief, and what we are currently working on is the sample portfolios, so you can see that evidence in action. Excuse me. And those sample portfolios will be from a range of grades. We're going to provide a sample portfolio for the level 1 merit, level 2 pass, and level 2 distinction. So you have 3 sample portfolios to review in line with the sample project brief, and they'll be available before the 1st of September. We're also developing classroom support packs. So that includes schemes of work, lesson plans, PowerPoints, worksheets, and a Unit 1 revision workbook to support the external assessment. We currently have a draft specification which is available now on the website. We also have a fact sheet, career card, delivery guides, and we're also currently working on some videos to support you with the interpretation of content from the qualification specification. We have a performance table quick guide which gives you a bit of information about performance tables and what's approved, what's not approved. As soon as we find out feedback on the DFE that it is or is not approved, we'll immediately update that performance table quick guide within 24 hours. So keep an eye on that. We're also currently developing an online platform to support you with internal standardization for Unit 2. So essentially what you'll be able to access is some sample materials. You'll be able to take that away, review it, and come back to the online platform and answer some simple questions around whether you agree or disagree with the feedback given in that sample materials. And from that, you'll get some responses as to whether you're correct or incorrect. And also you'll be able to claim some CPD, certificate towards that. And it's essentially been set up and developed to support you with understanding step up in grades, the levelling and marking required for Unit 2, the internal synoptic project. So that is planned to be ready for September. We also have prepared to teach events planned for the autumn term. As discussed earlier in the webinar, we're developing those career maps, LMI reports and career lessons to support you with the Gatsby benchmarks. And we've got 2 exciting projects we're currently working on now, but they're not expected till January 2019, so they are coming soon. But essentially the first one is around a quiz builder. So essentially what's going to be an online platform where you can go on and from a click of a button you'll be able to download a new practice quiz paper to support you with your learners for practicing and studying for the external assessment. So you'll be able to produce a new external assessment paper every time you go into it. And then the other platform there, the VO Digital Portfolio Solution, is a one-stop shop for Unit 2. So essentially you can upload any type of evidence, whether that be a Word document, a PDF, an Excel, an audio file, a video file, or even photos to a photo library. The app will also allow you to actually carry out observations using the app to record video performances, audio performances, or even use photos to create a digital portfolio. And what essentially you'll be able to do once you've got that full portfolio created, and which can either be created by the teacher or the learner, it can then be digitally marked as well, which should save you time with marking. And this will also support you with doing remote moderation should you want to have your work remotely moderated. So 2 really exciting projects we're currently working on to look to get that delivered and ready for January. We also have obviously the sample portfolios across those 3 different grades as mentioned earlier, and that will be ready before the 1st of September. And we're currently working on unit mapping docs, so you can look at the content that's been developed in the new qualification and how that maps to the existing qualification. So just drilling down a bit more closely for the classroom support packs. For each qualification there will be a variety of materials such as session plans, PowerPoint presentations, activity documents such as handouts, flashcards, etc. And what we'll also have for Unit 1 is a workbook, which is essentially it's a load of worksheets and activities where the learner will work through that workbook as you deliver Unit 1. And then once they finish delivery of Unit 1, that becomes a revision guide for the learner for the external assessment. And there'll also be a series of homework tasks. We currently have an example of what that will actually look like. So you can look at the standard that we're looking to produce for the health and fitness. Now there's a link on your web page now which will take you to a hidden web page where you can access those materials and download them. Now that link is only live till 9 AM tomorrow morning because we're currently having a change of websites. So if you can quickly jot down that link now and then you'll be able to access those resources just to see the standard of what we are producing for the craft qualification, the creative design production qualification. Like I say, we'll have Unit 1 ready for September and Unit 2 classroom delivery resources be ready at the latest for January.
Chris, what I'll do is I'll email this PowerPoint out tonight.
Yeah.
So you can, as soon as we're finished, I'll make sure that everybody who attends gets a copy of the webinar, the PowerPoint slides tonight, so you'll have that link.
Great. And we also have a series of useful guides. So we've got 2 links there which take you to the 2 main web pages on our website, which has a host of materials and resources, such as our performance table quick guide, our delivery guides, our benefits fact sheets. We've got our new model fact sheets, the synoptic project fact sheet to explain the changes that we've made. And we've got a lot more support resources which are also coming as we currently develop them. And there's a nice video there for you to watch as well, which also explains our new combined Level 1, Level 2 Tech Awards.
Right. Okay, we've got a few questions in here. So Louise has asked, well, she said, I'm very confused by the number of craft items required. There seems to be contradictions. Can we revisit paragraph 3 of the sample brief? This contradicts the ideas explained that 2 smaller separate disciplines of craft pieces are required. Then in the draft spec, upcycling one craft product used in the process. Right, so in the spec, it does say that learners have to be able to upcycle and create a craft item from one of the disciplines. That's in the spec, because in the sample brief, learners are given the choice whether they upcycle, but in future briefs, they might be required to upcycle. So they have to be able to know how to do that. And in the sample brief, they will never, in the brief, the synoptic project, they will never be asked to produce more than 2. Okay, I will go back and look at that craft brief again, but before I do that, we've got another question in from Kerry. What format should students present their work in? Kerry, that's up to the learners. It's up to you and up to your learners. There are some suggestions in the synoptic project. I think it's usually page 6 or 7. 7. That says what types of evidence are appropriate, but if they're happy working on A3, then they can do that. If they're happy working A4, if they want to submit digitally, that's fine. It might be that you have learners that aren't particularly strong at writing, in which case if they can verbally explain something and you can support that with a learner observation record, you can submit audio evidence as well, you can submit video evidence. What I would advise is that once you have registered your learners and you've made contact with your EQA, you could discuss that with them, because that's what your EQAs are there for. They're there to support you. Right, Louise wanted me just to go back to paragraph 3. I'll just get rid of this here. Nope. There. Right, we'll go back to the internal synoptic project brief, which is there too far. Right, so just to clarify, you have been invited to showcase your creative design and production skills at the event. You have been invited to display 2 craft products. Now those craft products, they can choose to use one material for each craft product, or they can have a multidisciplinary approach using more than one material. They can use recyclable materials, or they can upcycle materials. But regardless of which approach they take, it's 2 products that they have to produce. Earlier on in the specification in Unit 1, it did state that learners have to be able to understand the processes and techniques associated with 3 of the disciplines, but that's just to get the scope. As Chris mentioned earlier, the DFE are interested in the range, aren't they?
Yes, so essentially the minimum requirement is that you produce the 2 craft items covering a minimum of 2 disciplines. However, there's opportunity there if you did want to cover the multidisciplinary approach that you can do in both those craft items or one of them. But as a minimum requirement, you produce 2 craft items covering 2 disciplines, and this is what's been essentially approved from the content side of things from the DFE.
Yeah, I think we've realised that they don't want us to be able to specialise anymore. They want people who study anything to do with DT to cover a wide range of areas. Right, okay, so on the screen now, you'll be able to see some contact details. The curriculum team phone number at the top, that's my phone number, so if you've got any questions, please feel free to give me a ring. The curriculum email address there, that comes through, I can access that as well, so please, any questions you've got after today, just send them through. Now that we've talked through everything, I am going to send out one last poll. I just want to know what your thoughts are on this. So that should be appearing on your screen now. So while that's on, Suzanne's just asked, I missed the beginning of the webinar, will you be repeating it? We'll not be repeating this one exactly, Suzanne, but you will get a recording. It does just take a few days to get the recording uploaded to YouTube. But yes, you'll get a copy of the recording, so you can listen to it again whenever you want to. Craig's asked, does this mean that if students choose upcycling, they only need to produce 2 items? Yes, they'll only need to produce 2. But if they don't upcycle, then they need to create an extra item. No, all they need to produce is 2 items that can produce. So say you had a learner who had who had decided that they were going to do woodcraft and plastic craft, and they wanted to take an upcycling approach for one of them. So for their woodcraft, you might have access to a load of pine pallets, and your learner might be able to take some of the material from those pine pallets and upcycle to create their woodcraft item, and they'd still be doing a separate plastic item. Regardless of which method they take, it's only ever going to be 2 items, no more, no less. Right, so thank you for responding to that poll there. Does anybody have any more questions before we finish off for this afternoon? I think that's us about done then. If you think of anything else, just drop us an email and we'll be able to respond to that. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for Chris for supporting this afternoon, and we'll wish you good afternoon. Go and enjoy the sunshine.
Thanks very much now. Bye.